Welcome back to the Blue Chip Academy podcast. This episode, we're going to be talking about leveraging your skills into the transition. Our whole goal, mission here is empowering the next generation of leaders by equipping them with the detailed blueprints of success while using sports as our catalyst. Today, we get an inside look at what are companies looking for when you need to master your leverage and as your time as an athlete and make that transition into the corporate and business world after we hang up the cleats, tennis shoes, whatever that thing might be for you. So we have human resources, executive talent, and leadership consultant Victor Patterson jumping on. Thank you for coming on today, Vic. How's everything?
All is well. It's my pleasure, JK. Good to be with you again and really excited about this topic. It's an honor for me to be with you. We certainly have had a number of conversations about this topic offline and really look forward to sharing a little bit more with you this evening through the podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And thanks for jumping on again. So today, like I said, we're focusing on the keys to leverage, the keys to leverage and the critical factors for athletes that need to succeed during the transition. But before we get into it, let's have a little background on Mr. VP over here. So where are you from, man? And how did you play any sports coming up through the game? Like, let's get a little background on you.
Yeah, I grew up in suburban Chicago, second largest city in Illinois, Aurora specifically. And throughout my early years, I was a three-sport athlete, baseball, football, and basketball. And as I got further into high school, realized that basketball was going to be my ticket out of the concrete jungle that I call it. Love my hometown. But basketball was it, and had the opportunity to play some in college. Was invited at some point to have a pro basketball career in the Continental Basketball Association, and then just played competitively, throughout before really focusing on my professional career, which is what brought us here today.
Most definitely, I love that, and it's always interesting hearing what part of the country people are from and what sport they decide to play. Because like multi-sport athletes in Pittsburgh, they play football. You know, here's somebody from New York, they play basketball. Chicago, basketball.
Yes, sir.
So, because like, it's like that natural breeding ground, right? When you're talking, like even for companies recruiting talent, just talent in general, right? Because it's like talent, iron sharpens iron. So you see that you're probably coming up in Chicago playing different area, different talent and things of that nature. So always interested to hear what people decide to choose when that sport comes.
Indeed.
So, yeah, most definitely. So jumping into the basketball thing a little bit. So you say you get a chance to play in the Continental Basketball League?
Yeah. I'm aging myself a little bit, but it preceded the G League, and it was a unique opportunity, and fortunately I didn't follow through on that, and that probably was just a blind spot in my younger years, not knowing what was being afforded me, and letting that bypass. And so, as life teaches us, there are often lessons that we move forward with, and lessons that we don't, but we certainly learn from that. And that's a big one for me.
I think you hit it on the head when you said like not exposed to or having your eyes open to the different opportunities that are coming about, because I think that's what happens in the sports trail or the ecosystem nowadays is where, there's so many critical factors, big business coming in, and guys, whether it's recruiting process in high school, NILs in their face. Now I got to get to school, I got to do this. And it's like, there's so many opportunities of just, whether it's business going around you, different opportunities, connections to make that transition for obviously longevity in life, right? Sports obviously ends, but at the end of the day, you can still work in the industry and have all the different experiences that it has to afford you. So jump into it a little bit. Is there anything from your upbringing or from basketball that kind of helped you anchor, like that's been critical to your professional and career development?
Yeah, I think so. JK, and you can appreciate this. Getting the opportunity to play a sport from your early years to high school, for you and I at the college level, you really become a percentage of a larger pool of athletes. And so I think the one thing that will lead me to answering your question is just really the grind and the pursuit of excellence. and sometimes that is built through just competition. Other times, as athletes, sometimes we're self motivated and we're chasing to be better than we were yesterday because we know the competition is going to be better tomorrow. And so I think that for me, JK, that was it was not only a really good skill and trait from athletics for me to understand, but to retain as I got out of the athletic space. The other piece that I think is very important is I was always as talented as I was, as quick as I was, as skilled as I was. I tell people that I was also a cerebral basketball player, and I enjoyed the intersection between the pace of the game and the strategy needed to understand what were these other five people going to do that was trying to prevent me and my four teammates from doing what we wanted to do. And so as I continued to get older, and I think it really matured in high school, I was able to teach my teammates that aspect. So I think the cerebral piece of it and really playing chess when I thought everybody else was playing checkers. So that strategic mindset, being cerebral, I think those are the two things that I took from sports and have retained today.
That's a great point, man. Just like the strategy of athletics, I don't think gets enough credit in general, right? I talk to guys in football with being a physical sport. Like I always talk about the processing skills. Like, yo, that's something that you can log into. Like you see something, you can react. You see something move, you have to go to the next check. But that's
Yeah.
being cerebral, having critical thinking skills that are
Yes.
hard to come by, to be completely honest. And if you don't even
Yes.
recognize that you're building them, it's hard to enact them if you don't know, right? So like that's incredible to hear because that's everything that I want the guys to understand when they're going through this process, even when they're transitioning, even through the league, like retaining that confidence. Because there's gonna be a drop off when you transition out because you're going into something new, but you can take some core skills and put in tactical factors around that to make yourself, transition through that hard transition. I mean, that transition period or whatever we want to call it. So, how was your transition out of basketball?
It was interesting and it was isolated and at times lonely because as I mentioned and literally what happened to me is that opportunities was extended to me. um, I asked for a year, and I asked for a year. I had been extended a job offer. The year was going to give me an opportunity to train and get my body where I needed it to be. I had forfeited my senior year eligibility, so I was doing what I could to play pickup games and still stay sharp. And the offer came through me playing pickup games with the CBA team. So as I
Okay.
went
Wow.
through that, yeah, as I went through that year, as a professional employee, there wasn't anybody that could understand the decision that I was faced with. And so, in one hand, I was the first graduate with a bachelor's degree in my household. So I kind of bore that weight of family pride and I got a job. But but I was still very much a rawly competitive, well-skilled athlete who had been given an opportunity that nobody in my family could relate to. So it was a very difficult transition. I think the other thing that made it challenging is I walked into corporate America extremely wet behind the ears, and and for your audience that is going to ultimately end up in transition, corporate America is an amazing web. It takes skill, it takes adeptness, it takes attentiveness to navigate the chessboard successfully. Um, and it isn't always kind to being new. So I had that. Um, As time went on, ultimately I found my way, and I found my way by building relationships, which is what athletes do, particularly at that high school, that college, that professional level. Oftentimes you find yourself on a playing field with someone that you likely or largely didn't know before you hit that playing field. And so I leveraged that skill to help me navigate what was very new to me.
I mean, that's so true. I mean, when you talk about when you said corporate America is like a web, you know what I mean, and then it comes down to just it's like like a chessboard, and like not understanding the different chess moves, right? Like as you can be a chess player and understand different strategies or just the basic rules. Like okay, the pawn does this, but like having a strategy when you're going in. Like, playing against someone that has plays chess that has a strategy like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. It's like it's an unfair playing field, right? So what were those things that you had the core aspect of a competitive athlete? How did you kind of wrap that up into a professional? Like what were like some of the growing pains of getting there, like getting to where you felt comfortable in the space? Because I always tell a funny story here with like the first time someone CC'd me on an email when I transitioned out, I had words. Like I was very upset. Like, wait, you don't trust me? We talked like you put the reciprocal on the email. Like, what does that? So my friend was like, that's normal, man. They're just covering their butts. Like I'm like, well, we
Yeah,
don't do that in
yeah, yeah.
like this ain't.
You, you know that's a tremendous takeaway for the audience is understanding that communication. In corporate America, it's often referred to as CWA, which is essentially, or CYA, which essentially is cover your own behind. But
Right.
yeah, there are times that you communicate through email, which to your point is really really intriguing because as an athlete, you go you've got grown man to grown man conversations going on, and then you continue moving forward. So some of my initial growing pains included understanding the environment that I was in and that I couldn't move at a pace that was equivalent to what I knew, right? And at some point, somebody, if not everybody that I was around, understood that I was a college athlete. And again, you're going to be working with people that may be 5 years your senior, 10 years your senior, and they could care less about athletics. But you have to effectively dial it back a little bit and find a way to articulate we're all on the same team and this is our common goal. As an athlete that was in transition, it's very difficult because we are conditioned to get immediate outcomes through practice, and in the case of football, that 1 day a week game, or basketball, that 2 day a week game. Anything that stretches out 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, and you still may not have the outcome, that rips at our soul. And
Right.
so having to manage myself um, was an early growing pain. Understanding that people define the workplace differently than I may have defined it, very outcomes driven, and then trying to get everybody on board, another growing pain. Understanding that, quite honestly, things could get done in the 10th or 11th month of a fiscal year when in your mind we could accomplish it in 3 months. Another learning pain. And then just finding your space in a new environment where you can be somewhat authentic and then build on that to establish relationships that ultimately will govern and guide your success in this corporate space. So there are a number of challenges, not the least of which is learning something entirely new from what we had been conditioned for many of us 10, 15 years of our life.
Is it a given that you have to go through that growing pain, or do you think there's any way that you can prepare yourself for that, whether it's communication with a coach? Because I always felt like that was my difficult aspect, where it's like growing up as a coach's kid, I had a different relationship with, like, quote unquote, the boss, right? And then so in the college, it was like that. So it was always like, yo, we're in this together. And then getting to corporate America, it was almost like, no, I tell you what to do. And I'm like, no, I gotta wait, hold up. That's not how we get to. That's not healthy conflict. Like, I feel like you're bullying me, and like that's
Right,
not
right.
okay. So like, is there anything that you can do to prep yourself for that, or is that just something that you have to kind of grit your teeth to go through?
I think foundationally today we have moved in a more positive direction from my time in the undergrad and in the athletic space. I do think that relationships, and quite honestly, Justin, you may be one of a very small percentage of athletes at the college level that has that type of relationship. Um, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think those steps are part of the transition. Now, to the extent that you are a D1 athlete or maybe D2 athlete with high exposure to the business environment, that is an ideal situation because now what you're doing is you're having someone nurture that foundation for you, seed into you, mentor you on what that transition has looked like, and it's probably going to be a much easier transition than if it's just a raw break and transition.
Right, right. I definitely agree with that. When you talk about, I mean, I say it a lot here about having an acceleration plan. Like, as an
Yes,
athlete, I feel like it's unfair to say have a fallback plan. If you know this kid's goal is to become the top 1%, why would you tell them, like,
yep,
don't worry about having fun? No, you can have an acceleration plan. There's a lot of opportunities where you can navigate the space, maximize your time on the court, field, or whatever the case may be, and make a gap in transition and keep going. Because I've always experienced, whether it's in football, different sports, or especially in football, where guys have an idea of like, okay, I want to get into coaching, I want to get into personnel, I want to get into this aspect, and not really take the steps that are needed to really rebrand yourself into a coach or rebrand yourself into a front office or operational guy, and then taking the information that you have as an athlete and think it's just going to transition over. And it's like, well, you really have to learn like the different steps on how to like be a professional off the field in different things, right? Because like a coach is an executive, whether they're doing Excel's thing, whatever that thing may be. And then that's the moment where I've seen a lot of athletes kind of hit a little depressive space where it's like, well, dang, I was banking on that and I didn't really do the steps to kind of get it in place. So like just knowing what you want to do is like step one. Then
correct.
it's like actually putting things in place so where you feel comfortable to limit a little level of insecurity when you're transitioning out, because man, it's a beast. Like it's a hard thing to go through
Yeah, yeah. And
at
one
any
of the
level.
exactly, and I think one of the things that may be most challenging is you never think about the end is coming, and so when it comes, in my case, it was literally, hey, college basketball is over, and you go to bed, you wake up. In my case, I immediately had to think differently, and um, it was such a bumpy period because I didn't want to think differently. I wanted to keep hooping, and I knew I could keep hooping, but my reality was slowly seeping in that dude, you be off the payroll in a minute, and you're gonna be on your own, and this is what walking across the stage not only means to you, but it means to your family. And I didn't have this runway into that. It was just Yahtzee, time to think differently. And so it's very, very tough, JK. It's tough.
And with that being said, I mean, a lot of times when people transition out of sports, like, okay, here's a sales job, here's a marketing job. You decided to go up the path of human resources,
Yeah.
which I find extremely like just interesting in general because a lot of people just aren't exposed to it. And whether it's like the back end, I came up through football and I mean, football operations and everything is pretty much the same, operation as HR within a business.
Right.
What led you to HR? Just that
So
career field in general.
it's an awesome question. And so my undergrad degree was finance and economics. And coming out of undergrad, there were a number of different functional areas under finance that I could go into, and I did that. Shortly thereafter, there was an executive at the organization that employed me and head of human resources. Both of them collectively thought that with my personality, what they had seen of me, it would be a good match for human resources. I knew nothing about what HR did at that particular point in time. I can tell you today that I appreciate the decision. The function has and continues to evolve, but what I'm able to do today is I'm able to use the grounding fundamental learnings from finance, and I have a graduate degree in business as well, so I'll offer that. I'm able to use that foundation and work closely with leaders, executives, mid-level managers who are responsible for functional areas. My sweet sauce as an HR executive is that I help them weave people into the business strategy and deliver value or performance or profitability through having the right people, the right practices, the right processes, and the right talent. So I am, in some ways, a jack of two critical trades. And in corporate America, as you and I have talked about, there are two things that are critically important under the definition or the umbrella of value. One is unquestionably delivering on your objectives or outcome. The other is making sure that you holistically and effectively engage people. There are times, more times than not, where functional leaders just don't do well at managing both. But but having someone with my background allows them to really, really optimize what they're trying to do. And so where HR wasn't on my radar initially, I can tell you that it has given me the opportunity to leverage my interpersonal skills, specifically those around relationship building and really building authentic relationships with people. But it hasn't taken away that business acumen from me, which really was my beginning. From undergrad to graduate school, all I knew was business.
That's a great point. And you said it earlier about the athletics and building relationships. And I want to stick on that because, coming in through sports, it's meritocracy. You play, it's good. So like even when you're building relationships in sports, we all watch the film. I'm better than you, or you're better than me. So like we see why that's happening. So building like networking when you get into corporate America, though, it gets a little different in terms of building relationships. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you were able to leverage your relationship building skills and make that transition into the corporate network relationship building ecosystem building skills? Because I think sometimes that also gets lost. Because like if I don't have anything in common with you, I come from a meritocracy, I'm going to do my job, and that's not like, and then I'll move up from that point. And a critical piece in corporate America is having a strong network when jobs come available, when your names are in the whispers, when you're getting recommended for things that you're not applying for, and just that whole space. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I can. And I'll relate it to being an athlete. I think that there are two key components of being a successful athlete that maybe aren't always talked about, but are always evident. And that is a level of humility. As you know, growing up through that system, as an athlete being coached, you don't have a voice. And so you become humble quickly. The other piece that I believe is evident in all successful athletes is the curiosity behind getting better. And that becomes, asking coaches, I didn't do it right. How should I do it? So that curiosity exists for the most successful of athletes. And JK, that's what I took into corporate, and I continue to use that today. And quite honestly, there are leaders today that acknowledge that curiosity in me and that humility in me, and that's what they like about working with me. So go back to that transition. It was just that. It was being aware that I've walked into a new environment that I know little about, and clearly there are people around me who know a lot about that. Leveraging that humility and then just being curious. And it literally was just that, whether it was my new teammates, which would my immediate team, or talking to an executive at the time, and being interested in understanding how are you managing your business. That has allowed me not only to be successful in the businesses that I'm in, but it's also allowed me to go cross functionally within organizations and build relationships that ultimately were advocates for me and my professional brand, but also helped me be successful through a deeper and broader understanding of the business as well.
That's a great point because even just from the level of the humility that you have to go through to stack on some of those skills, I found myself when I first got out of football. I mean, I worked immediately with the Browns. It was football, 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 and I found that I had to get some didactic skills, experiences. So I had to find a space where I was forced to be in a humble state or show some humility, like just knowing like, okay, I don't know everything about the sales and marketing thing, but like in football, like I got something to say about this, and I know I recognize where I got some things wrong, and that's where I even talk about to my teammates or younger guys coming up of even if you want to transition in football and work as a coach, like it's very similar to working in corporate America because you're being judged in office based things. It's just the content is the same. But I had to go into the healthcare industry to really get that sense of, okay, going to go get some office managers coffee to talk to the doctor so I can meet my quota on the sales and doing all these different things. So I got to figure that out. So now I'm focused on like, all right, how do I figure this out? Go get caught. Okay, I'm not thinking like that's not the best way to do it because I don't know what the best way to do it is. But that's another piece that I always try to give guys some advice. If you don't know exactly what you want to do in football or anything like that, get a couple years in corporate America because you can learn so many different things. And in that, you probably get some clarity on like what can you do back in sports? What can you want to do in your own passion? So I love that you said that aspect from the relationship building and things of that nature. But another thing, like we talk about merit-based networking, whether you're outside of your company, right? Like just building that ecosystem, and we're just thinking that you can go to a company and do well, have high sales, and someone's going to come and get you. Can you talk about like when you're trying to build your professional network and how an athlete can provide value, right, to the people that are, like, say you go to a conference or a networking event? How can you maximize that opportunity?
Yeah, really, really good questions. And again, you relate it to sports. It's doing your homework. In sports, you've got the playbook. In football, you've got the playbook. In basketball, you've got the film. and you can watch the film and you can study the playbook as long as you want to. The same principle applies when you're preparing to go to an industry event, or maybe it's just an event that's going on in the metropolitan area where people exist. Having an understanding of who the host event is and what their particular area of expertise is, doing a little bit of homework around that, and having a functional understanding of that space so that you can get into a reasonably competent conversation is a really, really good start. Having an idea of what it is that you want to take away. As an athlete, I think that most of us have a leg up in an environment like that because there's generally intrigue about who are you, what was that experience like? And for someone that has not done that, that could be their first 3 or 4 questions. Conversely, the athlete gets to say, well, I've talked a little bit about myself. Who are you? Right? Tell me your story. Why do you work for the employer? What can you tell me about what makes someone successful in that environment or with that employer? And at that point, you are really in a dialogue with someone, and it's just going to take off from there. You can use that very basic foundation from that conversation to the next person that you want to talk to in that environment. If it's an industry networking event around sales and or specific industry, whether it be pharma or medical sales, the conversation becomes a little bit more targeted, but the objective principles, the founding principles are the same. You're just probably generally in the same audience. But it really is two or three very basic questions. Hi, my name is Victor Patterson. Glad to meet you. Tell me about yourself. And it just spirals from there. If it's certainly somebody that you'd like to stay in contact with, you close that out. Is there a way that we can exchange contact information, business cards, LinkedIn? This is what I'm really looking to do for myself. I'd love to be able to reach out to you from time to time and just to get some coaching or some advice. People love that. They'll suck that up.